At the New Jersey SBDC Network, our mission is simple: to help businesses grow and succeed. Our consulting, training, and information services make it easier for businesses to reach their potential. Whether you're currently in operation or just starting out, we have the right tools, resources, and expertise to help you succeed. Visit us online to get started on your path to success today.
A pleasant good morning to everyone. My name is Takoa Bell. I am one of the event coordinators for the NJS BDC at Rutgers-Newark. And on behalf of Dr. Tendai Ndoro, our regional director, I would like to welcome you all to our Understanding the Financial Implications of Supply Chain Decisions webinar. For those of you here that are unfamiliar with the SBDC, it stands for Small Business Development Centers. And here at the New Jersey Small Business Development Centers at Rutgers-Newark, we serve as the premier provider of business training and technical assistance services to establish small businesses, startups, and as well as to entrepreneurs. We are one of 12 centers in the NJS BDC network, and we service those in Essex County. Our center here is hosted by the Rutgers Business School and funded through a partnership agreement between the Small Business Administration, Rutgers Business School University, and the New Jersey Business Action Center. Our mission here is to help entrepreneurs as well as business owners start and grow sustainable, successful businesses through the delivery of one-on-one business consulting, training, and technical assistance programs. Now, all these services are provided to you at no cost and are paid for by your tax dollars. If you or your business is located in Essex County, our website is www.rnsbdc.com. And on the top right-hand corner of our website, we have a red button labeled Request Counseling. So clicking on that button will lead you to fill out some information about your business or your business idea. And within 24 to 48 business hours, one of our consultants will reach out to you for an assessment. And for those of you here this morning that may not be in Essex County, our headquarters website is www.njsbdc.com. And on that website, you can type in your county and it will refer you to your local SBDC office. For the benefit of everyone attending today's webinar, your audio is muted, but we will be taking questions via the Q&A and the chat feature here on Zoom. So please feel free to post your questions and we'll do our best to respond during or at the end of today's webinar. A copy of the presentation slides along with the video recording of this webinar will be emailed to you within 48 to 72 business hours so that you can have all this information to refer to long after this webinar has ended. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you all our presenter for today's webinar, Professor Anthony Tate. Professor Tate is an assistant professor in the Professional Practice Department of Supply Chain Management at the Rutgers Business School. And now, without further ado, I will turn today's webinar over to Professor Tate.
Good morning, Takoa, and good morning to those who have joined us. Very happy to be a part of this webinar as we seek to strengthen small businesses and to share knowledge, in particular about supply chain decisions and the financial implications. Now I'd like to share my screen. Let me begin here and trust you can see my screen well. Just let me open this up a little bit. Okay. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is understanding the financial implications of supply chain decisions. I want to just start a little bit with just telling you a little bit of my background. Which is always important because it gives some context as to the speaker and the speaker's expertise. I've spent most of my career on Wall Street in areas of finance, sales and trading, investment banking, asset management. And over the last 6 years here at Rutgers Business School in the Department of Supply Chain Management. And you might say to yourself, as some of my students, well, if you're a finance guy, how are you teaching supply chain management? Well, the first thing I want you to know as it relates to your business is that supply chain management really is a methodology, right? It's an approach that businesses, whether they are producing a product or whether they're offering services, all need to apply so that they create efficiencies and effectiveness in their supply chain. And when they use a supply chain methodology, what is going to happen through that efficient supply chain is that you manage costs, driving them down, increase your revenues, collaborate with partners in your company, and you're going to increase profitability. If you don't manage your supply chain, then it's going to be difficult for you to do well in your business and to see the delta increase over costs versus revenues. So my years of experience in raising capital and in dealing with private and public institutions, allowed me to understand how all of these industries work. And when you understand how they work, then you're also able to understand where some of the issues are in a given supply chain and bring about a change to the better of those companies. Now, my presentation is going to take in 4 parts. And again, at the end of each part, perhaps if you have some questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll see if we can answer them. And certainly at the end of the presentation, we'll go through any questions that you may have. On this slide called Supply Chains and Supply Chain Management, these are companies that we're all very readily familiar with. Google and Coca-Cola and Samsung. And these are very large companies. But I want you to understand that I could just have easily have put your logo here, because whether you're a small disadvantaged business, woman-owned business, minority business, or other designation, you too operate within a supply chain. In this slide here, I like to always kind of begin with this slide in part 1, because a large company like Boeing allows us to see the sophistication within the product design. And if you just take a second and look at this slide with me, this is their 787 Dreamliner structure. It tells us the suppliers that they use for the various parts that go into this plane. They have parts like the wingtips that come from Korea. They have fixed and removable leading edge that comes from suppliers within the United States. They have some that come from Japan. You have others from France and Sweden. And so the supply chain approach that Boeing takes in building their aircraft is that they use suppliers that are global. And their strategy behind this is that they get lower costs and more efficiency, and in many, many cases, the expertise of companies or suppliers around the world. And they bring those parts then to the United States, where they then bolt on these various parts, they build, and they conform to regulations here. And this is very much like the strategy of other companies today. Find suppliers that produce high quality parts, low cost relative to where you might buy them in other places, including the United States, and then you bring them to the United States, either in part or whole, and you sell them into the marketplace. Now, my next slide is going to bring us to the thought of what is a supply chain. So before we get to the financial implications, we have to understand and agree what is a supply chain. So it's any organization anywhere in the world offering a product or service, they have a supply chain. So if you're making hats, you're making a product, and therefore you're operating a supply chain. If you're Netflix, if you're the NFL that is providing sports entertainment, they are operating a supply chain. So products and services are created, as we know, from materials, on equipment. It involves labor, time, money is really important, and other resources. And producing and delivering these products and services, they require companies called suppliers, they require a manufacturer, and they require customers. The customers are really the end takeout. So you make something, pass it through your supply chain, and you're expecting that customers are going to buy that product or service that you've made. Now, supply chains can be very simple or they can be very complex. And I like to use this example of McDonald's. And when I teach this to students, I ask them if they've ever been inside McDonald's, for which we all laugh because the students today are much more health conscious about food and sodium. And so going to fast food restaurants may not be something that they have on the number one thing on their list. But if they were taken there by their parents when they were young, I said, when you go into McDonald's, do you know that you're entering a very simple example of a supply chain? And they say, what do you mean? I said, well, you walk up to the person taking your order, and there you meet their point of service. You give them what food you'd like. You look up on their menu, and you'll say, I'll take a number one. And I think from my memory that's the Big Mac meal. And so that's the Big Mac that has French fries and it has a Coke with it. That person then keys that in. You pay for the order there. And then that order goes to the back of the house electronically. And those who are serving on that internal simple supply chain take the buns and the meat and the lettuce. They remember to add the special sauce, and they then wrap that up. Someone else who's working on a different station, they fill up the bag with fries, and then someone on a yet different station make sure that they pour the beverage of your choice, and they put that together in one bag. They give it to you, the customer, and you walk out. That is an example of a very simple internal supply chain. And yet the same company, McDonald's, has a very complex supply chain. They're global. They get their potatoes from out west. They get their breads from another supplier. They get the condiments that go on those sandwiches from yet another supplier, buy them in bulk to keep costs down. Time, money, delivery are all part of McDonald's very, very complex supply chain. So supply chains exist in organizations like McDonald's, very large, and they exist in smaller companies that perhaps you are the business owner and entrepreneur. They exist in public or private companies. So a public company would be like IBM. Private company might be your company that you formed and that you own 100% of the stock, and you are the primary owner of your institution. For-profit organizations and not-for-profit organizations all have supply chains. Now, this slide is going to talk a little bit about the structure of a supply chain. And let's take a look at this. I'm going to fill it in so that we can see it in a holistic way. So To the far left, we have the suppliers that we've been talking about. And when we speak about a supply chain, it's a linear line. And to the far left is really the point of origin where everything starts. And to the far right is going to be what we call the point of consumption. That's where the selling takes place, and that involves our customers and the consumer market. So with the suppliers, as you see on my slide, we have the raw materials. So that's the very basic essence of the products that ultimately are going to be manufactured. You have suppliers that handle raw materials. They literally extract from the earth. They take down trees. They're involved in the textile business. You have intermediate suppliers that work with those initial raw material suppliers. And then they pass what they are handling to finished material or service suppliers. Those service suppliers now have things like the raw materials in a very unfinished state, but they're in a state that can now go further into the hands of the manufacturer. The manufacturers sometimes, like a car manufacturer, will ask the suppliers to provide them with certain parts and components. Those might include things like nuts and bolts. They might include windows that go into a car, leather. And once those component parts are passed through to the manufacturer puts those parts together in their factories, and they produce that complete car, in my example, with the car manufacturer. The car manufacturer then has partners, relationship companies, such as wholesalers and distributors. In the car market, it's local franchise owners, the car dealership. And then the car dealership has retail customers like you and I, and the cars are sold into the retail or the consumer market. But we don't want to leave out the thought that the supply chain is connected through the use of logistics. And so parts then come in, they have to be stored in certain places like warehouses. Therefore, you're talking about how do we manage inventory? And this is probably something that you know very well in your business, because you're always trying to balance how much inventory should I have on hand? How much do I need to keep in the pipeline so that I'm never out of the product that I'm trying to sell when the demand is there from my customer. Sometimes these parts are logistically moved by trucks, rail, by planes, many of them coming through the global network are put on ships on the water. And if you have special kinds of products like natural gas, they'll come through pipelines. So the supply chain consists of the flow of materials and products from your suppliers to the manufacturers out to their customers. Now, this is a really important slide, because here now we're talking about supply chain flows. And I want to just focus on the bottom arrows, because we've kind of covered the top. The very top, the red arrow, is where we emphasize the thought of product and service flow. It's flowing from the point of origin, where we have our initial suppliers, through the manufacturer, all the way out to the customer. So whenever you have a product made or a service produced, it's going to flow upstream from the supplier to the customer. But now information, and as you and I know, we entered the information age at the beginning of the internet, where we're able to share information outside of specific companies that had intranet connectivities. But information flow is vital to the success of companies. It's even more vital to small businesses and entrepreneurs because you need to know just how the consumer market, how your customers are, their perception, their understanding of your product, any kind of issues relating to lateness, quality, you need to know and have that feedback. So information has to flow between the suppliers, the manufacturers, and the customer, and then the customer to the manufacturer to the suppliers. This is critical when you want to improve your product. And I'll tell you, I remember owning a SUV, and where the manufacturer had put the cup holders was very close to some of the dials for the radio or air conditioning. And I always found it very annoying because when I was traveling and I put a cup there, my hand would either turn off the air or turn on the heat or change the channel. And I remember sharing this with the general manager of the dealership. And I don't know if it was because of just my single point of feedback or others also, but in the, I think it was 2 iterations after that same vehicle, I saw that they had recessed, they had moved the cup holders completely away from the dashboard and all of the buttons there. And so they took away that issue for drivers. And that's why information flow is really critical. Now, payment flow, it flows one way. And I want you to know this, because I point this out to my students, and I say to them, where do companies make their money in a supply chain? And many of them have a lot of ideas. Well, you know, the suppliers, you know, the manufacturers are making money. And I point out to them after we have this discussion that there really is only one point of which revenues are produced in the supply chain. That is at the register when you and I purchase that item. So all of the partners in a given supply chain are, they are aligned with the thought that they have a product that has a consumer appeal, and they work and they advance their funds in the expectation that you and I are going to buy that product or service. And then when it is purchased at the point of service, money goes back up the supply chain and it reimburses the partners for the advancement of the cost to produce their product or service. Now, why is this an important point? It's important because if the costs of producing a product or service are not kept low, when the revenues come in, there's less money profitability that's going to be realized by all of the partners. And that's why we're going to get to a slide that comes up, that one of the most important things that you can understand and work on in your business with your supply chain partners is this whole idea of transparency and collaboration. You have got to know what's going on with your partners, and they have to know what's going on with you. Because if you don't know what's going on, the costs are going to run out of control and your profitability margins will certainly decrease. Then the last arrow here is returns flow. This is when an item is brought back, returned, could be for damage to the item. And sometimes returns are just because of customer preference. And I'll give you an example. I happen to like the color blue. So someone gave me a red sweater for Christmas one year. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the sweater. It looked great. It's just that I like blue. So I returned that to the retailer. Now, that's not a problem in a sense, but for the retailer, you now have to handle that item twice. Someone's got to make sure that it wasn't damaged. It's got to be put back into your inventory. And the mere fact that you have to go through those steps costs the retailer money, because it's that person's time, it's the computer cost that you have to do that. And so returns flow is a significant part of the supply chain. Companies don't like to deal with it, but it certainly is something that they have to manage very well. Another part of returns flow is recycling and the costs associated with dealing in a effective, sustainable way, returns or things such as even medicines that have expired. So again, now this connects a little bit with the thought I had about relationships between links in the supply chain. So every company is in the supply chain, and every company is both a customer of their suppliers, and then they become a supplier to their customer. So the supply chain of your company, you are a supplier that receives or that provides something to a relationship that you have to your right, and you're receiving information, parts of a product from the suppliers or partners to your left. And again, it's important that you maintain healthy, transparent relationships. So supply chains are everywhere, and you're connected with them. Now, I want to just take a product that will underscore what I've been saying, and then talk about something that is a fundamental risk factor in supply chains. So we're going to talk about candy bars, something that we all know and something that we all enjoy or have enjoyed. So here's a simplified candy bar supply chain. The raw materials suppliers, they provide sugar cane, they have the cocoa beans, they have the polypropylene and ink that's going to be used for packaging. The sugar cane produces sugar and milk, the cocoa beans, chocolate, and cocoa butter. And when it's properly flowing, the supply chain, you have the candy bar manufacturer here, the Hershey Company. That chocolate bars are then moved to wholesalers and distributors that keep it in their warehouses. And then ultimately they have their retail stores like Walmart and Walgreens, amusement parks that purchase that and hold that. And then you and I go to Walmart and other places, and before we check out from buying our bread and milk, we'll find a whole rack there of candy bars and things of that nature that are very difficult to pass up. And so we purchase some of them. Now, in this slide talks about disruptions. This is the risk factor to your business, small or large, and to every business, disruption. So the pandemic brought about a global disruption to supply chains in 2020. We're still feeling the impact of supply chains being shut down or supply chains lacking some of the material that they need to produce their final product. An example of that is that in the car business, the new cars are at a premium. So if you wanted to go into a dealer and negotiate down a price, what you're going to find is that the dealer may even have raised his price, and at a minimum is going to hold the price that's listed on the car in his dealership. The reason why is that the pandemic has led to a shortage in the microchips that go into the cars that we use today. So if your car is able to read speed and distance and have sensors, those microchips have become less available because the manufacturers of them had to shut down during the pandemic. The same thing with other parts. So in this slide, it's talking about what happens when there's a disruption. Well, the disruption was that the cocoa bean market experienced some kind of a problem. That problem might have been weather related. That problem could have been a strike with unions, or it could have been a border issue. And so now for the Hershey company, they don't have cocoa beans to help produce chocolate and cocoa butter. But there's enough of that product in their pipeline that to us, the consumer, we are not yet impacted by this shortage. And so what takes place is that you can't get the chocolate and cocoa butter. You've placed your orders and the orders continue to ship. But now candy bar production in this slide is going to be forced to stop when the inventory that you had starts to run out because you don't have the chocolate and the cocoa butter. You might have the sugar and the milk, and you may have the lecithin to go into the product, and the packaging is still there. The customer still sees the candy bars there, but now there's less and less at the checkout counter. And so this disruption now is starting to be seen in the company's supply chain. And so what do we end up with? All of the suppliers are forced, or the manufacturer is forced to cancel all of the orders from the suppliers until that one initial product, the cocoa bean, becomes available again. And that disruption now impacts the supplier market. And then ultimately, when you and I go to Walmart or other places, we find the counters are bare. That's what we call a total market stockout. And therefore now, not only are the suppliers impacted, not only is the manufacturer impacted, but also the customer market is impacted as well. This is something that we've seen throughout the pandemic, right? Hospitals had this problem with PPE because some of the markets that they were buying that from, it shut down, China and Vietnam and other places, and they had to try to find alternate means by which to get some of the materials that they needed to be able to treat the patients that came into the hospital system. So all the links are interconnected, and eventually a disruption with one of them is likely to impact all of them over a period of time. And therefore, a supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about supply chain management, because we're just talking about supply chains. And the first step to understanding the supply chain is to visualize the flow of materials from beginning to end. And that's what we've kind of done as I've stepped us through from the point of origin all the way to the point of consumption. And you see this here in my example of the fresh produce supply chain. And the thing that is here that you can appreciate that we didn't speak about earlier is that anytime you're dealing with fresh products and produce, you're going to have the added burden, at least the company is, of meeting government regulations. You're going to have inspection on fresh produce and foods. They have to be stored at certain temperatures, and then they're going to be moved from one country to the next, which then increases the oversight of inspections and regulatory compliance. This next slide has some links in it that relate to Coca-Cola and Starbucks and their global supply chain. You can take a look at that at your leisure. So what is supply chain management? So the way in which I've spoken about it up to this point, it may give you the impression that it's just about managing these steps that are involved in the production of a product, where you get some materials and you pass them along. But it really is a little bit more sophisticated than that. The supply chain management can be thought of this way. It's the management of your supply chain, and it's an active role. It's the coordination of the network of otherwise independent trading partners or companies who are helping to create a product or service. And then they move it through the supply chain out to customers. And this is really important: when and where the customer wants it. That's really important. You could have a high quality product. You can have a really good network of trading partners. But if you have your warehouses in places that it takes really a long time to get to customers, then customers are going to go and find an alternative who brings those products when they need them and where they need them. This last banner on the bottom is very, very important, because sometimes we speak about supply chain, we have supply chain majors, but really it's a methodology as to the way business gets done. So if you're working for Goldman Sachs has a supply chain. If you're working for McDonald's, it's how their business is going to get done. And it's the execution process of any and all businesses. So the management of your supply chain, and every supply chain, is based on these two general ideas. Every product that reaches an end user, it represents not just your effort, but the cumulative effort of multiple organizations or partners that are part of your ecosystem. Most organizations typically have only paid attention to what's happening within your own company, your own four walls. And sometimes if you're an entrepreneur, because you wear many hats, you may really get weighed down and you focus a lot on what is within your organization. But really, if you're going to be successful and you're going to get to the next level and you're going to increase your profitability margins, it really is that you must actively manage all of your collective relationships. And therefore, that collaboration is going to allow you to create what we call value. So the supply chain, the management of it, creates value. It adds value by managing the processes of all of your independent partners so you can collaborate with one another in an efficient, effective, and cost-conscious way. So sometimes you may say, well, why do I have to go out for lunch or dinner with my supplier? Why do I have to have these meetings every month? Well, it's so that they know what your plans are, right? You may have a new customer that came on that they want on a monthly basis, 200 more of the product that you provide. Well, if you don't sit down with your suppliers and your other partners, even the transportation relationships that you have, you might make a promise to this new customer that you can't deliver because your suppliers don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the people, something might have changed for them. So you create value when you share that information with your suppliers. And they'll say to you, oh, I'm glad you shared that because we can now add 2 additional people because we know that we're going to have the revenues from what your customer wants and from the orders we're going to get from you. Therefore, they are more efficient and effective, and they can drive costs down in that way. Now, here's what the goals of supply chain management entail. Number 1, you want to always increase customer service. That is customer satisfaction. If your customers and my customers are satisfied, they're going to remain customers of your company. So increase customer service. You get those products and services to your customers when they want them, when and where, and at the lowest possible price, right? And high quality. And you want to do this while at the same time, simultaneously, you want to reduce inventory, right? Because you don't want to be holding a lot of, the hats or the parts that go into the hats, because that you had to pay for them. And depending on the size of your company or where you have your warehouse or where you hold inventory, you're paying the carrying costs of where you're placing your inventory. And you may actually have to insure it, right? And so you want to reduce inventory and operating expenses at the same time. And the 2 primary reasons that companies look to manage their supply chain is to achieve cost savings and to be better coordinators of their resources. So you can see this effort that's involved, but that effort adds value to you and to all of your partners in producing your product and producing the service that you offer. So I've talked a lot about the manufacturing of products, but also know that supply chains are in the service industry, but they're seen really as intangible products that are offered. So if you go to the hospital is providing medical services. And so the doctor's knowledge, the medicine that is there, but they're providing a service to you to help you if you are not feeling well. And so customers are actually paying for the labor and the intellectual property of the service provider. When we talk about the service industry, the customers, you and I, are much more directly involved than when a product is being made for us. When something is manufactured, it's in the manufacturer's manufacturing facility. When it's completed, it's now we go see it at the showroom, or we go to the retailer and we buy it there. We're very, very rarely involved in those kinds of products unless it is something that is custom made for the individual. But in the service industry, we are frequently involved. So if you want your clothes to be cleaned at the cleaners, you have to take your clothes. And the cleaners has the infrastructure to do that. If you want a haircut or you want your hair to be taken care of at the salon, you have to carry your hair there, and they're then going to do the service, perform the service that you've asked of them. In the academic field, we sell education and intellectual knowledge. If you're PricewaterhouseCoopers, you're selling brain power. They do consulting work and advisory work. And so the customer has to be really involved. Like when you go to your tax preparer, you have to bring your tax returns, you have to bring your W-2. And so if you're in the service industry, right? So some of the companies that I work with through Rutgers and our internship programs and things of that nature, they provide a service. Some of them are truckers. Some repair boilers. And so they have expertise, but they have to go to the customer's home and work on a product that is owned by the customer. Now, service products, unlike manufacturing, cannot generally be produced in advance or inventory. They are typically produced and consumed at the same time. And here's some examples, like when you go to a restaurant, you go to eat. Now they have some items that are there that they purchase, but they don't know how you want the food prepared. For you to go, you go to a nice restaurant, perhaps, it's Valentine's Day, and you go to this restaurant because they have nice ambiance, the food is good, but the things that are needed to provide that service for you, they have to have. And those things are called facilitating goods. They facilitate the service that they're going to carry out. So perhaps, someone on the call today is in the restaurant business. You have to have the kitchen equipment, you have to have the table and chairs. Depending on the ambiance and atmosphere, you have to have the stereo equipment that is going to play nice, soft music. You have to have the cutlery. Those are all the things that you have to have there so that when someone shows up to experience the restaurant dining experience, that you can give them the best service that they're looking for. Now, I want to talk to you here about two, what we call basic supply chain capability models. And this is really important that you, if you're writing this down, I hope, or certainly you'll get the slide presentation deck. But most models, products fall within these two supply chain models. The first one is what we call the efficient model. And let's see if your product falls into this category. The supply chain is configured to produce a large volume of the product that you're making available. You produce it as quickly as possible and at the lowest possible cost. So what's important about this model to understand is that there's not a lot of variability in the product that you're producing. It generally stays the same. So I like to think of things like soap or toothpaste or a red hat. Those things you can make with a fairly significant amount of volume. You can make them quickly because you're not changing out the actual machine that you're using. And you can make them at a pretty low cost because you're making them in higher volume allotments. So therefore you have predictable supply, highly utilized capacity, right? Your people are always working because it's large volume. You have low cost production and your inventory is turned over very quickly, okay? It's ideal for what we call functional products, like, as I mentioned, something like toothpaste and items that people use all the time. The responsive model is configured from a manufacturing standpoint to be fast and flexible, to respond quickly to dynamic market demand and new product launches. So I'm gonna give you an example of, if you're in the area of fast fashion, there's a company, Zara, H&M, that these are big companies, but they are under this responsive model. And therefore, they've got to be very flexible in their capacity. If they have 50 people, they have to keep maybe 45 of them or 40 of them busy, and the other 10 have got to be always prepared to respond to some new style, new pattern, so that they can now start working on the new demand and they have to do it very rapidly and quickly. Some of these products that fall into this area would be products with technology. If you're building some kind of, models to help people predict consumer behavior or look at trends and things like that, add new variables. These are the responsive model that companies will follow. Now, 95% of companies, and probably your company, if you are manufacturing, making a product, fall under what we call the push business model. And push means, if you just visualize it, that you get behind a stack of something and you're pushing it forward. The business term is, the push business model is make to stock. So that you have a lot of consumers that like the water bottles that you make. Last year, you sold, 2,500 of them. And so that there's an increased interest and demand because your water bottle actually keeps the water cold for 24 hours. So now you just tell your supplier, we're going to make 5,000 of these, and you're going to put them in inventory in anticipation of the demand that there is already known for your very high quality water bottle. The main advantage is that the product is available. So when my organization wants to give water bottles as a gift for a holiday party or something of that nature, I call your company and I say, can I have 150 of these bottles? And I know it's short notice. You say, no problem, I can get them to you overnight because your product has been made, it's inventoried, and it's ready to go. On the production side, you are able to produce more at a lower cost. It's what we call economies of scale. It's a term maybe you're familiar with, but those who may not be, it just simply means that you can produce more of the same product at a lower cost by making more of it and utilizing basically the same amount of people and machine time to make it. Then if you were producing a small amount and then had to now change your either add people or change something in the equipment that you use. So when you make similar products, you can make a lot of them, you drive costs down, and you utilize your resources to the maximum. A disadvantage of this model is you've got high inventory. And if all of a sudden somebody else comes out with a new water bottle design that maybe keeps water cold for 48 hours, well, now you're at risk that you lose some of those sales. The inventory is now sits there longer, and your money, which we call working capital, is tied up in inventory. So, so this is a major disadvantage. Another disadvantage is that this model is heavily dependent on really accurate forecasting. So if you say, well, we sold 2,500 last year, you're going to have to use some of the sophisticated forecasting methodologies to say, should we make 5,000 or should we make 2,700 or should we scale back to 2,000? And so forecasting, which is really kind of guessing what we should produce, is a really critical part of this model. And forecasting errors can be relatively costly. The second model that is for businesses that make customized products. So if you're a dressmaker, you make wedding dresses, or you make suits that are custom suits, you would fall into the pull business model. Some large companies that are in this same category would be companies like Boeing. I just heard that I think it was Boeing that got a big order of airplanes, $4 billion order. And for companies that make customized large orders, they are in this model. They only start to make their products when they have an order in hand, and usually there's some kind of down payment. And the reason for this is it's a custom order, right? So the bride that's looking to get married, she may not want to just go into a retail store and buy something off the rack. She may want to, for several reasons, have you make a custom dress to fit her body, fit her style, take one style from something that she saw here and another style, and she wants you to create one dress from those two styles. So you have heavy levels of customer service and opportunities for customization. You don't have to worry about, should I make 50 dresses? No, you make them on a order by order basis, and you have very low inventories. The disadvantage for customized orders is that every customer order is like a rush job. Or when's your wedding? Oh, it's in 3 months. That's going to be a rush job for a real customized order. You know, can you get it to me in such and such day? Well, I got to wait for some of the beads to come in from a different country. So there's a certain level of stress that's associated with this. The other side is that the customer has to understand that the lead time, the time from which they place the order to when they get it, is going to be a lot longer than if they went and bought it off of the rack, in my example with the bridal dress, right? And the manufacturer, or you, the producer, you don't have the advantage of economies of scale, since these are specialized orders. I want to go through these slides just quickly, but I was just on a call yesterday with an organization that they specialize in looking at planning, processes, ways in which to make supply chains more efficient. And they're a global organization. And this slide, without going into all of it, really sets a picture for us of how important it is to understand all of the different parts of your planning diagram. And I will mention this, that as a small business, one of the most important documents that you can have is the business plan. And I would argue with you or submit to you that if you don't have a business plan, it is going to become more difficult for your business to survive and grow, because the business plan acts as the foundational document for the concept of your business, the financial aspects of how you started it, your initial investments, and how you're going to grow your capital, the products that you have, understanding the competitive landscape of your industry, and all of these different areas that go into your business plan. The financial plan is part of that, strategically how you're going to approach it. And so I want to suggest to you, if you haven't done that, or you started it but you haven't finished it, that you need to sit down and really create that business plan, because it will be your living document that allows you to have a real plan, and also allow you to sustain your vision and to grow your business. So from here, and I'll just touch on this a little bit, that when it comes to supply chain planning, it's the use of a standardized and a stepwise approach to managing your supply chain. So there's this methodology and process, and you should be able to open this up and see, well, here's my product, here's where it comes in, here's my suppliers, here's my long-range strategic plan, here's the intermediate range tactical plans, and here's the short-range operational plans. And this is a really key component to effectiveness and efficiency. Now, supply chain planning and control. This has to do with operational excellence. And again, it's a single set of numbers that you need to use to run and operate your business. And it's going to generate significant improvements in customer satisfaction, the productivity of your workers, managing inventory, and the costs associated with managing the manufacturing of your product, your service, and the collaboration with your business partners. And I'll leave you with this slide here, if you would, that maintaining the balance between the demand from your customers and the supply side, right? That's what it costs you to make your products, is a sometimes challenging a balancing act. But when you manage your supply chain, you get better at driving the cost down, right? Stepping back and looking at, well, is this supplier giving me the best quality? Is this supplier on time? Again, I was on a different call yesterday, and we're talking about supplier risk management, right? So maybe the cost is less dealing with a supplier in Vietnam, but they're never on time. And so you may pay a little bit more working with a supplier in Newark, New Jersey, but they're always on time. And they're close enough for you to have meetings with them. You're not dealing with time zone issues. So this whole idea of managing and balancing the cost and efficiency and staying on top of your business is really, really critical to your overall success and profitability. So here's some benefits when you manage your supply chain. You're going to have improved customer satisfaction. Certainly are going to see increased revenues. Your costs will come down. You're going to utilize your assets better. And what this means is it could be human capital, your people. It could be the assets, the equipment that you have to produce your equipment, right? So that's part of the return on assets that we look at from a financial standpoint. You're going to add customer value. And one of the reasons that businesses fail, especially small businesses, is that they stop adding value to their customers. And their customers go away to someone that is adding value for them. So if you want to retain your customers, you got to manage your business, manage your supply chain. They're going to see that in the increased quality of your items. You're always on time. You might even be early. They're going to see it in how your people deal with them from a customer service standpoint. And not only will you retain them, but you and I know that a satisfied customer, they're going to tell other people. And they're going to say, look, I've got a great experience with this manufacturer, this company. You should try them. And then all of a sudden you go from 5 customers to 15 because you're managing your supply chain and customer service is at a high level. You can eliminate the rush of unplanned activities, uncertainty throughout your supply chain. You're going to manage inventory levels, And when there are disruptions, you already know through your planning what alternatives you have and what we call redesigning your supply chain during disruptions. And I want you to know that it's not a dirty word when you've got to alter your supply chain. So the largest companies in the world, when they couldn't get PPE from their normal sources, they had alternatives. When your supplier for your bread products can't fulfill their obligations, you can't start scratching your head at that moment when you've got you've got an obligation for catering. You should already know if he can't give it to me, I can go to this alternative supplier. And then the customer doesn't know anything about that disruption. All they know is they had a great event and a fair, and your products were there on time and they were fresh products. Now, supply chain management in the present and the future. I'll just say this with this slide, that if you are utilizing a lot of manual or doing a lot of manual work, and you're not utilizing technology of certain sorts, then you're wasting time and money. If you're not familiar with Office, not just Word, the word processing for letters and documents, building a proper structure so that each one of your suppliers and customers have their folders in Word or Google or other kinds of systems like that, you are operating at a deficiency to your competitors. If you don't know how to operate Excel, well, there's YouTube, there's Excel certification courses you can take that are cost effective so that you can look at your own books and financial records relatively quickly and know what's going on in your company. Then e-commerce, right? Why have a very large warehouse? Why try to compete with the big retailers? Well, maybe selling on e-commerce will be a better option for you. Figure out how to use technology to create a competitive advantage for your company. Take the time to talk to people that are in the area of technology, in the area of e-commerce, so that you can figure out how your small business, medium-sized business can create a competitive advantage. Because even though you may be a small company or medium-sized, there are small companies where the owners and even some of the employees are millionaires because they are making millions between the toes of giants, because they have identified a competitive space for themselves. That's really important. So technical innovations, AI, understanding the Internet of Things, the interconnectivity of the Internet is very important, as well as blockchain. So I want to just stop here for a second before I take you into the financial side to see if there's any questions that you have on what I've covered. All right, so I'll keep going. Now that we have that down, here's really important stuff. So money, okay? Money matters. And that's why supply chain finance is important. Not only understanding a supply chain, your supply chain, not only understanding how to manage all of the parts of your supply chain, and every link and part is important. When you understand it, you're able to understand the implications financially of when you make certain decisions, right? So one of my colleagues was the chief procurement officer for Schindler Elevator. And he says that if we had supply chain employees that understood both the full breadth of their supply chain and the financial implications of making changes to any part of the supply chain, those types of employees would be twice as valuable to their organization. So this is why understanding your supply chain is important, and understanding when you make decisions. So if you give someone a supply chain, they can move your business through it. But if you teach them how to modify it or to change it, then your company can profitably move products and services for a lifetime. Another one of my colleagues. So supply chain finance, it's about what to purchase, where to get the money to purchase the materials you need, how to efficiently manage your resources. It's recognizing that companies have made fundamental changes in the name of profitability. So in other words, if you're not making money, or if you're barely being profitable, you need to make changes to your supply chain. You have to stop and say, well, you know, this whole offshore global thing is nice in concept, but it's costing me too much because the transportation costs are higher, or the delays are always there. Right now, there's huge delays in the shipping industry because of COVID, and then because of the blockage of the Suez Canal. The ports are backed up. In the newspapers, they're saying, buy your Christmas and holiday gifts now, because if you wait too late, the resupply of them may not get here in time for December. This is in August. So you need to think about, do I need to modify my supply chain? Then understanding those changes and the impact, how they impact profitability, and the levers that are available to make those changes. And then from a business standpoint, you must always measure what you've done so you understand if they have worked, and if they have worked, to keep them so that you understand what is meaningful and what is not. I'm going to move through these a little quickly here. A very important concept is how to think critically. And I don't mean this, how to be critical, but no, how to really analyze things from a rational standpoint. So critical thinking, this works, this doesn't work. What am I missing? What technology should I use, right? Should I be making sure that all my emails are forwarded to my phone? So even if I'm in a client meeting, that I can understand how to, what is going on if there's an emergency. These are all very critical decisions that you make. But how do you transform your supply chain? You know, what do I do first? How do you determine those changes? And then how do you measure the existing performance that you have? And how would you estimate the future performance? And in many companies, right? So if you're a CEO, if you're the head of your company, you may not take this on, but you may give it to one of your reports. You might come to Rutgers and have our students, through our industry clients project or an internship, you might say to them, all I want you to do is to come and I want you to look at our supply chain, and I want you to tell me where we need to make improvements. And they'll put together a report. And then they'll say, here's the areas that you are lagging. Here's what we project would be future performance. And then they're going to convince you, and you, if you need to report into your board or other executives, here's the money we need to spend to make ourselves better. Supply chains make revenue happen, and the better the supply chain, the more profitable. Now, here's a roadmap. And I'm going to go through it quickly, but here, these next two slides are roadmaps for you to think about. How do you make these changes? Well, one, you have to identify value. So when I was doing work with Ernst & Young and Price Waterhouse and Deloitte, this is what we did if we were working on a joint project together. We sit down and say, okay, let's have a meeting about the product or what this company is producing or offering. We want to figure out what's going on. And then we would review their priorities. What are the current business objectives and imperatives? There's a corporate strategy, and you have to identify that corporate strategy. What's the leadership vision? Identify the business units that carry that out. And then this third bullet in the second process is really, really important. So if you have a pen, you should put a star next to this, because sometimes the CEO, he or she has a vision, but then there's a misalignment with the business people in carrying out that vision. And that misalignment, my friends, may not be intentional, but it may be that the CEO just doesn't really have an understanding of what is really going on in the marketplace. So you might say, we want to sell, 2,000 more of this product. But if you can't get the raw materials, you'll never be able to sell 2,000 more. So the business managers and the CEO have to be on the same page to say, well, we can't do 2,000 more. We can do 500 more in the first 3 quarters of 2022. And then by the end of 2022, we think we can add another, we can double that, because we think that the markets for this raw materials will open up again. So it's important to be on the same page. If not, you have misalignment. Then how effective is the current performance against what the vision and plans were of the senior staff? What are the leading options to generate new value? Whether it's determining the path for eliminating errors and waste and low productivity, whether there are options for increasing value through adding technology of some sort, or an additional worker or workers. And then what value is going to be created, and what is the go forward plan? So you identify the value, which will be created from evaluating the opportunities. You select the best options, and then you have to develop a plan. You got to put things down in writing that this is our go forward plan. And then you got to drive and realize value. Okay? Sit down with all of your departments, your cross-functional teams. Establish what are going to be your performance targets. We want to perform, 3% higher than what we did this previous year. We want customer service times to go down and customer service satisfaction to go up. Things like our KPIs, key performance indicators. We want these things to be better, the turnover ratios to be higher. We want to make sure that our productivity increases, less downtime with our equipment. And we're going to look at the drivers behind that, right? Transportation, technology, the pricing from which we buy from our suppliers to go down. And then you got to look at, are we on track to achieve these performance levels? And you need to have agreed upon timetables like weekly, monthly, quarterly performance reviews. And then you want to extend the benefit of this analysis and the implementation of these changes across the board in all of your departments. And then what you'll find without going into this slide much, is you're going to see increases in the key areas, right? Inventory days, accounts receivable days. How long does it take for you to get your money back when somebody buys your products on credit? So you can utilize your cash and put it back into your supply chain. When your salespeople sell the orders, how long does it take for your people to fill those rates? How effective is your sales force? And when you see these impacts, you'll start to see the increases in the numbers that are important and the decreases in the costs. Now, I know I only have about 5 minutes, so I want to get to, this is really important on the financial reporting. You need to know, as a business owner, the financial statements. You don't have to be an expert, but you need to be knowledgeable. So you need to know what your income statement is, what it tells you, the balance sheet, and your cash flow statements. So the income statement is very simple. Did the firm make any money? That's what the purpose of it is. And it provides your financial performance of your company over a specific period of time. How did we do over the last 6 months? Did we make money? Here's your calculation. You take your revenues, you minus your expenses, and it's going to tell you what your earnings are. Here's what an income statement looks like, okay? Starts from the top, tells you things like your operating expenses, other income, all the way down to what is going to be your earnings. The second key financial statement is the balance sheet. And the purpose of the balance sheet is to determine your financial condition and to identify the assets that the company has and who owns it. Because you might own an asset and you may have another asset on your balance sheet that really is owned by the bank who gave you the loan to buy the property, right? The key thing about the balance sheet is that it's like a picture. It's a snapshot at a single point in time. Give me your financial, your banker may say, and you're looking for a loan, give me your balance sheet as of 12/31/2020. They want a snapshot of your financial condition, what the company owns and owes as of 12/31/2020. And it's your assets is going to equal liabilities plus your owner's equity. And this is what the balance sheet looks like. The left side, you have your assets, fixed and current assets. The right side, you're going to have your liabilities on top, and you're going to have what is the ownership position on the bottom. Both sides of a balance sheet are made to balance out. And then lastly, the cash flow statement. This provides information about your cash receipts, cash payments, and any net change. Where's the money coming from that's coming into the organization, and where is it going out to? And it's going to tell me if we made money or if we lost money. It's going to effectively show a change in your net cash position. This statement is really very helpful to business owners. And that's what it'll look like. So financial statements tell us nothing about the future, but they help us to predict the future based upon what has happened in the past. Again, the income statement, cash flow statement tells me the historical performance over a given time period. The balance sheet is a snapshot at a particular point in time. And I want you just to know in these last couple of slides that when you make decisions, supply chain decisions, they impact your income statement balance sheet. So when there when you have on-time delivery, you're going to see increase in revenues. Lead time to customers. These are all revenue producing influences. When your fill rates are very high, product returns may take away from your revenues because you got paid, but now you have to take that money out of the cash register. Under cost of goods sold, well, high procurement costs, inventory costs, packaging costs will all have a negative or will drive up your direct costs or the cost to produce your goods. Your overhead, right? So if you don't have enough people and you're paying overtime or productivity is poor, well, those are going to be seen in the higher costs in SG&A. And if you can't meet your obligations, your revenues eventually will suffer. Some of these same influences will impact your balance sheet, right? Unplanned spending means you got to take more money out of your cash account. If you give volume discounts, well, you're giving up some of your spread, and therefore you're going to have less cash. And inventory is a really critical part, because if you don't have enough inventory and customer demand goes up, well, you're not going to get the revenues, and people are going to say, every time I go to that store, you know, the food is not there. They're always out of this type of food product. And eventually they go to some other place that is able to meet their needs. Let me just go here. And working capital is really important because this is the available money that you have to keep free to deal with increases in demands and other kinds of issues that come up in the supply chain. So here's what I want you to know. Profitability, efficiency, leverage, and liquidity are all financial metrics that you need to understand. For profitability, what proportion of every dollar that I sell ends up in my pocket? Efficiency, how efficient am I utilizing my assets to generate sales? There's a lot of waste, people sitting around. Well, your ROI is going to be not anywhere close to what your investors want to see. Leverage, what proportion of the firm is financed with debt? Some debt is good, too much debt is not good. Liquidity, how much cash do I have to meet short-term obligations? Too much cash uninvested is not a good thing because you can invest it and get a higher return. But if you don't have enough cash, especially if you're looking to borrow from a bank or a private investor, they're going to say you don't have enough liquidity to take you through some lean times. So these 4 areas of financial fundamental analysis is something that you should be aware of. So these are the key takeaways. You run a supply chain. They're simple and yet they're complex. But supply chains and your supply chain needs to be flexible and agile to be able to change with the changing markets and demands. And therefore, decisions that you make in redesigning your supply chain should always be done with the understanding of what the financial or money implications are to your enterprise, to your income statement, balance sheet, and the overall healthy standing of your company. So I want to thank you all for listening. I hope that you'll have some key takeaways and some things to think about as you evaluate your company and the effectiveness and efficiency of your supply chains. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Tate, for that informative presentation and for your time today. So I'm just checking the chat and the Q&A. Looks like we have no questions. So if you find that after the webinar, once you received the video replay and the slides, if you have any questions, feel free to visit our website, www.rnsbdc.com, and request business counseling there. So the website's there, or you can send us an email at our email, rnsbdc@business.rutgers.edu, to receive assistance as well from Professor Tate. Okay, great. So at this time, I'm going to direct everyone to the chat. There you'll be finding some of our upcoming webinars, as well as the other supply chain webinar that we are hosting, which will be in October. Let me just post that there. You should be seeing that now. So we have our e-commerce planning part 2 intermediate webinar, which is actually directly after this one at 12. So if you're interested in learning about the e-commerce process after taking your first steps in setting up your business, the link to register for that webinar is posted there in the chat. That's the first link there. Again, that's today at 12 p.m. And then on the bottom, if you scroll down, we have our risk resilience, a common sense approach to supply chain risk, which is our other supply chain webinar that we are hosting. And that will be in October 29th. And this year, we are hosting many other webinars in topics such as financing, access to capital, marketing and branding, e-commerce, credit counseling, cybersecurity, state certifications, government contracting, human resourcing, and so much more. So if you were to visit our website or our Eventbrite page, you would definitely find a webinar or workshop that best fits your business needs. I do want to remind you all that you will be receiving the video replay as well as the presentation slides within 48 to 72 hours. So you can have all this information and apply the strategies and techniques to help your business. After the webinar has ended in the browser, you will see a survey pop up. Now that survey will help us to adjust our presentations in the future, as well as give us some information on the type of assistance you may be needing for your business. So if you have just a minute or two to complete that, your feedback is very much appreciated. And on that note, we will now go ahead and end this webinar. I want to say thank you again to Professor Tate for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time out on this Friday morning to join us in today's webinar. And we look forward to seeing you all at our future webinars and workshops. Have a great day, everyone.